Hi everybody, welcome to the webcast. I'm Chris.
I am Shane, and I gotta tell you, I wasn't there, but I guarantee Chris did not say, "I know everything, Kelly." He probably said, "Dude, I don't know everything. I know how to look. I know how to look things up." And Kelly was just like, "I know everything."
Selective hearing, you know.
My Google Foo honing steel and stones are well made and crafted. Anyway. So.
Yeah, I cannot imagine you saying you know everything, even about corgis, let alone Asians. Nah. So, worry not. We've got some great PowerShell for you because we're taking kind of the next step here, man.
So, if you guys have tuned in thus far, you know we've been doing PowerShell for a month or two at this point. We want to kind of build on that. We've kind of done some basics. Let's go into a little more basic, advanced level type stuff to do some dynamic script logic, right?
Perfect.
So I think we should just dive on in and get started. I mean,
make it so.
When we talk about looping and branching, that might not be clear to some people. If I said, "Hey, branching," someone say, "Oh, where's the tree?" You know, they might not quite get that.
Before we dive in, was there a question that we wanted to? Did you guys want to throw a question out?
Dear Chris and Shane, can you point to some background material or examples of looping and branching? I've done looping in batch, for, if, else, while, etc., but would like to see how that looks in PowerShell. Thanks in advance, Michael Z.
Oh, hello, and thanks for the question.
Some background, there's actually a good way to look up examples in PowerShell, but we are going to talk about, we're going to give you some real-world examples here, but there are some great ways, just looking at like about switch or something like that in help to see some great examples.
In fact, if we can show the screen, I'll show this right now. A good way to do just that is in a PowerShell window. If you have this open, minimize this guy. So the about help thing he's doing, if you do get help or the alias just help, about underscore, and I'm typing control space, and it's going to show you all the different possibilities of the help files related to different aspects of PowerShell. And among those are things such as break and continue, which we'll go over that here later about being able to kind of control and do the flow
and
control.
If and switch, etc.
Yep. We have if down here. So if you want to know about more if, for example, let's get that help file and actually see what it says. Good thing this machine's very fast. Otherwise, we might not be waiting here as long as we
may
are.
not have updated help on this machine.
So, I know you guys are sitting there in suspense. I know I am. Probably sweating on the inside here. There we go. All right. So, you can kind of get some examples there. A lot of the examples you're going to see in Microsoft documents, whether it's within PowerShell or online, are going to involve a lot of numbers. You're going to see, is this greater than that, less than this, equal to that? Which is good for a lot of demonstrative purposes, and many of my examples today will use similar examples.
But yeah, you don't usually see a variable in there.
You might see actual helpful information. Yeah. So, but there it is. So you can actually get that this way. If you do it in the ISE, sorry, I just kind of popped that open on the other. You can actually do it and actually get a better list here. If I'm doing get help about it, it's easier to search through and click on because you can use the mouse. So there's a lot of good information here. In fact, I would actually recommend, if you really want to get into PowerShell, read one of these a day. Make it a goal.
Oh, that's a great idea.
So, in fact, you could even make it a random goal and actually write up something to basically say, pick one of these guys and randomly choose for me, and go for that. And if you want that help writing that, I can do that for you later. So, anyway, or you can practice PowerShell and do it yourself. So, getting back to PowerShell though. So
basically, okay. So your question, you're going to see some of these because you've used the ifs, you've used some of the switches, we're going to use the whiles. I think you mentioned in batch. You're going to see a pretty good correlation to what you used to do in batch to how you're going to do that in PowerShell.
Yeah, if you can do for loops in batch, you'll be fine because those can become understandably complex. I'm fairly comfortable in batch myself, and those for loops sometimes make you bang your head on the wall trying to get a little bit confusing. So
I think they're more complicated in batch.
I agree. So we will be going over that today, so it's a great question to start out with. So that being said, what is looping and branching? Well, when I say branching, I'm talking about kind of just the logic on how to control things. So the conditional logic, so if statements, if else statements, or like a switch statement, or if you're familiar with VB script, select case statements. If you're familiar with VB script, good for you, but I'm sorry. So
Yeah, switch actually, and case in different languages, case is the equivalent of switch.
Yeah, like SQL. SQL does case statements. Yay. So I guess we'll pop open this again, and we'll actually just go over the for loop and just jump on in. There's a lot of material to cover and stuff. So,
All right, so conditional branching and looping.
not for, wrong one.
Okay.
Correction, let's do if.
Start with the if.
Yeah,
All right.
let's do the if. So, this is Boolean logic. What does that mean?
True or false?
True or false. It goes back to some guy, some British mathematician, I think, named Boole, who defined this logic. He was like some linear algebra guy or something. But anyway, he defined the whole true or false concept that we use in computers, in languages at this point. And so we're basically saying this condition, evaluate it. Is it true? Is it false? And act accordingly.
Yep. So you can tell in this very first one, you're saying, hey, does this, of course, if you take this literally, does the directory some path exist?
Correct. So, if statements, since they're evaluating as Booleans, here I'm saying test path this guy, does it exist or does it not exist? True or false? Mm-hmm. So if it's false, I'm going to go down to the else statement. If it's true, it's going to stay up here because it exists. It evaluated to true. If it's false, perhaps I want to create the directory, so I actually created a little command here to basically say, create this new directory. So if I was to run this, I'm just going to highlight this selection here and run just the selection. I have it WhatIf on the command new item so that I don't actually create the directory since I don't want to. So here it'll tell me, what if performing this create directory, and it would because it does not exist. And we can verify that because I'm old school and love that.
Yeah, so just once again, if you're not familiar with WhatIf is a great way to find out what would transpire. Jordan, really quick, give us in 10 seconds what the WhatIf does for you.
So if I'm doing something that's going to be in a lab environment, it'll let me know if I'm going to break everything before I test it live.
Like maybe deleting computer like AD objects or deleting directories or something.
I may know an admin that deleted his own account.
Main.
What was his name? Jordan.
No, I'm actually innocent on this one.
So WhatIf is a great tool. Just don't forget to use it.
It is, and so I can actually just take it off here if I wanted to actually create the directory. Just show you that real quick. Let's actually create that directory. I showed you in that folder that it does not exist, some path.
Okay.
Let's run it. It created it, switch back over to the directory, and now if I refresh, there is some path. So that's just that easy. Now you can actually have dynamic logic in your scripts. No more one command, one liner, whatever stuff. Be dynamic. Did this happen? No. Then do this. So
Yes.
another example of this that you might run into is checking the status of a service.
Cool.
This is another simple example that I have used in my own scripts in data gathering and formatting and logging. I want to know a specific service, or services in this case, but we'll get to a collection later. I want to know if the status is stopped for the spooler, because we all care about the print spooler. So here I'm just basically saying, here's this expression, is it true or false? Now the expression is using this operator here, which is actually comparing. It's a comparison operator.
Those of you familiar with other languages, you may have seen this as the two equal signs.
Yes.
Equal is the same as -EQ.
Correct.
In this case, meaning does the status, does it equal what I'm saying? Is it stopped? Does it have a status of stopped?
Correct. If I just normally type get service spooler here at the PowerShell line here, it'll tell me a little bit of information about it. I can find out more information, but if I want to know the status, like what I'm doing here, I'm going to use the dot symbol here to get the properties of status and see that it is running. So I want to know if this status equals literally running, and it's true. So in this case, we know that this, what I'm putting inside the if condition statement, will evaluate to true. So if true, do this.
There might be some people out there saying, is it case sensitive? Like right now, you've got camel case for running.
Correct. It is not by default. So if I do running, true. You can make it case sensitive, however.
Isn't that just a dash case sensitive?
It's actually part of this here. So if I actually do a control space bar to pull up the list here, you'll see a bunch of them that start with the letter C. That makes it case sensitive. So this would be case sensitive equals. So this apparently is true. Well then, suppose there's pie on my face.
Well, do it uppercase G. I want to see it.
Yeah. I believe CEQ is supposed to be, well, you know what? Times like this, guess what I do? Get help about comparison operators. Let's pull it up. because this is how I am.
2.5
Of course, this is taking forever because, yeah, there it is. Say, so,
Okay, and let's get Alex to get. I want this machine rebuilt. Just throw that out there. This
Yeah.
machine gets rebuilt.
so if we wanted to actually see that there is a lot of information here.
Yeah, I'm talking
So-
about Guinness. Guinness is a machine on which we're running.
Someone in the
machine-
chat needs to correct me,
The
apparently.
machine that is going to get Chris's punch any moment doesn't mean that damage will be inflicted. It's more of kind of a tickle. Having been punched by him before, felt
Well,
rather
considering
good.
the machine is about 200 feet away from him.
We try to piss him off a lot just because we like to see him punch, because it does kind of feel good. It's like an in-office massage.
So this is mostly live for your benefit, and I'm ignoring what they're saying. So, yes, case-sensitive version of equals is C equals. I don't know why that wasn't working, and I'm sure there's some reason here that I can't think of live because I'm dripping sweat here. But
No worries.
one of you guys in the chat should figure it out and let people know, mostly for my own satisfaction, because I'm going to, after this is over, go look at this and be like, and then
Well,
explode.
as we're talking about PowerShell core coming up and cross-platform, the Linux folks are going to be used to everything being case sensitive.
Yeah.
Generally in Windows, it's case insensitive. There are some exceptions to the case insensitive in Windows, but just want to throw that out there, especially for those who are play in both worlds,
Yeah.
Windows and Linux. Just throwing that out there.
Yep. So, anyway, kind of moving on because I just kind of did a little tangent there. So this is the if statement. Its basic format is if, else. The else if is just adding an extra if within the if statement, and you can do as many as you want, but it gets convoluted pretty quickly.
It gets kind of hard to read. Else if is great really when you're expecting 2 or 3 possible values,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yes.
That's where else if is great. It's like, hey, if it's not this, it's probably going to be this, and
Yes.
then if not that, nothing.
And then else, this, whatever, do stuff. If you get greater than that, we're going to introduce you to what you probably should be using, which is called a switch statement. So just moving on quick here to a switch statement. Here is that example. It's a little bit different than an if statement because an if is a Boolean example. A switch statement isn't. And so you basically have these values or list of values or whatever that you're running.
Here's an example. Yeah, we're gonna look in WMI.
Yes.
And here you're looking at the computer system and you're saying, I want to look at the domain role.
Yep.
Well, there's only a finite number of domain roles. We actually know what they are. So there's a value that's going to be associated. In this case, like 6 or 7 or something,
like that.
domain roles. So this is great for a switch, not for a bunch of else ifs where you just say, all right, we're going to look for this value. It's going to be one of these 7 or one of these 6. So you just throw down each of the possible values.
Yep. That's really easy, especially when they have those values stored as a number, and that number means nothing to you. So in this case, we were just running this particular class here, Win32 computer system. So if I was to normally just run that command by itself, you can highlight selections and run them. You'll see that it gets back 1. Well, what does 1 mean? What does it mean to me? Well, let's use this switch statement. I'm going to run this entire thing. Actually, let's just highlight it.
Well, as you highlight it, notice we're well, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll just
I do want to break this down because those numbers on the left absolutely mean something.
Correct. And so what we're doing here, you see that the output there is domain role, member, workstation. Well, what that meant is the results of this command that we ran first, which was the number 1, we stored that in the variable domain role, which we switched on, which basically says, hey, I want you to use this value for the comparison, what we're doing, what we're going to look at for our switch statement. Based on that, if any of these match that value, do what's in the script logs.
It's not returning standalone workstation, the text. It's
Correct.
returning 0, 1, 2. Notice I do like at the bottom where what happens if this returns something that's not 0 through 5.
Yep.
Maybe it's 6, or maybe it's the word Jordan. Probably not. What if it returns something you're not expecting? Well, you can still have your switch statement account for everything else.
It's this default right there. That actually is kind of the catch-all. It's a good one. In fact, you can use this with whatever. Like you could actually switch this on numbers. You could do fancy things, like whatever you want. So if I did switch, let's say the number 3, and do some stuff here. I have, let's just do 2. If I could type properly on this keyboard, I'm 2. Apparently I can't type well, so it's IOM 2. I'm just going to run with it.
IOM, bada bada neu.
I'm 3. But, little gotcha on this one. I'm also 3.
which means it doesn't do the break when you might think. So once it reaches a value, it will still process unless you have told it to break.
Correct. So if I do run this selection, I'm 3. I'm also 3. Just be aware of that. You'll have to use what's called a break to break out of this switch statement.
Show 'em real quick.
So if I was to...
After that first 3.
I'm just going to separate this with a semicolon, which separates PowerShell commands, but I could break this onto a different line if I wanted to. But if I ran this... I'm in the quotes. Yeah, that's rookie mistake. Let's run that. I'm 3. See, it breaks there. It says, I'm done, and break out of that current structure.
It leaves that statement, and it says it leaves switch. It says, I found whatever. Let's move on down to the next part of the script.
Yep, there's a good one. That's really all there is to the branching that I want to talk about. I mean, I just really want to go over it really briefly, just to kind of dip your toes into it to get your familiarity with, if true or false, do this, else do this other thing. And this switch statement, which is kind of more of a complex one.
It can be important to keep up to date. I know a lot of you guys will write your scripts and then they'll go off into a vault, never to be updated. Here's an example really quick. In PDQ inventory, we have effectively, this is written in .NET, not in PowerShell, but we effectively have the equivalent of a switch statement in looking for the type of chassis in inventory. So we can show, this is a server, we'll have a server icon. Well, a new item was added in this last version of Windows. We didn't see. We did have effectively a default, so it just showed a generic computer. But somebody wrote back and said, "Hey, this icon is not right. We just had to go find. There's a new value. Add that to our switch statement, and now it shows up." So, keep just because your disks or your scripts end up going off in the vault, you might have to update them every now and then.
Yes. And side note, soapbox. Here I am. Document. Please keep good comments. Just side note, getting off my soapbox.
Moving on down the line. I like that.
So, going on, do we have any questions before we move on, transition here, before I get too off the deep end here?
By the way, if those of you on chat talking about that case-sensitive, Jason Noonan, thank you, did write something. We won't read that out here, but read that. He explains the case-sensitive thing.
Good.
Moving on down the line.
Cool.
All right, dear Chris and Shane, when should you use the ForEach Object commandlet versus just ForEach? Thank you very much for your response, Tiffany G.
This is a great question. Thank you, Tiffany. So, you seem to be a little bit more advanced than your average PowerShell user at this point anyway. Good. This is actually the exact topic that we're talking about next, is ForEach. So, hopefully that this will answer for you. But the long and the short of it is one is used in the pipeline typically, the other one is used not in the pipeline and kind of spells it out a little bit easier with variable names, and I'll show you that. So kind of going right to that, let's pull up that example that I have. Don't save. Don't care.
I would love to have that. Save, don't care.
Just delete all the things. All right, so essentially it's this. So we have this top one, which is the ForEach, which is kind of going through a collection or going through an array. It's going through single or multiple items. It's stored in a variable or even just there within the expression itself, and then do things to them. And so you can actually specify those by the variable name here. So we have ForEach, and then you specify item. You can be anything you want here. So I can say let's define something. I have my array. I'm going to call my array just array, and I'm going to do 1, 3, 5, 7, 9.
So there's 5 values in this array.
Yes. So for each, open parentheses, guy in array, and you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, those who know me probably wouldn't be, I use the term $guy in a lot of my for each loops because I find it funny saying, this guy. Yeah, that speaks volumes about myself here.
You take your pronouns very seriously.
I do, so...
Literally. This guy.
I'm having trouble typing because I'm laughing. This guy. And if I run this, for each item in that array, in that array that we have set up, it'll actually go in through and say, this guy 1, 3, and then 5, 9. And just do that 5 times for each one of those values. So, in the case of ForEach, it's clearer in the way that you can actually specify your variable name. So if you have a list of computers, for example, you can say for each computer in computer list. Then when you're actually doing your logic within the for each loop, you can actually act on the $computer variable, and it kind of makes sense with what you're doing. Connect to this computer rather than this guy. Although I do like.
So what about the ForEach object?
For each object is a special one. So in this case, let's take the same example, array. Let's say we want these values. Let's pipe them over to for each object. For each one of these guys, we're going to run this bit of code. In the for each object, if you're using PowerShell prior to version 3, the way to reference the current object in the pipeline as it's going through them is the $_. It's a placeholder.
And I still like that as opposed to the way it is now, where it's just a little more verbose.
It is. The new way, because of people saying, I don't understand and get this whole $_, they use the term $PS item, which either works if you're using PowerShell 3 or later. But in this case, for each object, if I want to do that exact same statement that we did before, which was output this guy.
I'm not your buddy, guy.
I'm not your guy, friend. Yeah, so we'll do that. You get the exact same output with a little bit different syntax, but if you kind of compare them here on the same screen, this one's a lot easier to read because of $guy versus $_. Mm-hmm. You can break that apart and actually do an extra logic within your for each object and say, oh, $_ and set that to guy. So I mean,
so generally for each object in the pipeline, you've got your for each, which goes through the array, and then every single value in there an object is created, and then in the pipeline you would reference that object using for each object.
Yes, but that's exactly what we're doing here. In fact, the example that I just kind of threw up here was I want to get a list of services that start with PDQ, which on this machine there should be two, PDQ inventory and PDQ deploy. I'm going to save them in this variable and then go through them for each. So I want to basically say what the name of the service is and then restart it. Here, if you notice, I also have a WhatIf just so you can see what's going on there without actually doing it. So let's just run this selection. It'll say, restarting the following service, PDQ deploy, and then WhatIf, it will restart it. I wrote that same logic using for each object as well, right below it for comparison. So this is the example of the array, just now using this more real-world example here. I'm taking the list of services and piping it to for each object, and then doing the same using the $_. So it's the same. It's apples, oranges, whatever you prefer.
If you're a little confused on that pipe symbol, check out the last PowerShell webcast we did second week, or the third week of August was pipelining.
Yeah. So there's a lot you can do in pipelining, and for quick little scripts that I throw up, I prefer the pipeline because it's really fast, really easy to work with. But if you're doing anything even semi-complex, I highly recommend using the for each construct, the one above here, simply because you can spell it out and specify it and be really specific, which kind of goes hand in hand with my little soapbox discussion of comment. Be clear. Let your script speak for itself. I don't want to have to decode it and then with a microscope trying to figure out what's going on. So,
do we have any? And thank you for that question. Do we have any other questions? I know the last webcast there was just so many questions we didn't get to.
That's a good point.
Dear Chris and Shane, can you test a loop in PowerShell before running the script? Check to make sure that the for each statements are correct and not a broken loop. Sincerely, Doug K.
Well, there's the syntax, and then there's actually checking to see, I guess he's wanting to see if there's an error in the logic, but you certainly can't test the values without running it.
Right. So there's a couple things, like he's saying, which is testing the syntax, where if I pull up a brand new page here on the PowerShell ISE here and say I do for each whatever I'm doing here and then open up the script block, you can see here, well, it's hard to see on the screen here, but there's a little red squiggly there next to the parentheses indicating that there's nothing being evaluated in there, or perhaps I actually had array guy in array.
So like you're talking about something that you haven't defined yet.
Right, and then I'm doing all this other stuff. I'm just commenting stuff out here. But say I forgot this last brace here. There's another indication up here that there's the little red squiggly. It's not that great in ISE. I'm hoping maybe they'll improve in the future. But if you are using, say, VS Code, you can kind of do their automatic formatting to kind of go, awesome, do all the formatting for me, and then it should be more apparent pretty easily to see, oh, these don't line up, or these do line up, or wait, what's going on, or explode.
A lot of it comes down to whatever you're, like if you're using Notepad++, I mean, if you're doing everything in Notepad, you're not going to get that kind of feedback. Right. It comes down to an ISE, or if you're a developer, your IDE.
Yes.
That's why developers are very, very devoted to their particular IDE in question because they like how it presents their syntax and gives them immediate feedback on if there's something that they're missing.
Yep. So I'm just going to move on real quick just so that we can cover some of these stuff. I have a lot to cover. So we'll get this all to you. The next little thing to cover are ranges. You can actually do the ... syntax to do a range. So if I run 1 ... it'll give me 1 through 10. I can store that in an array. I can do something 10 times. I can do whatever. I can do it from positive to negative. Oh my goodness, it's exciting. You can do all the things. You can do it with combining ranges. I'm just tickled pink right here. 1 to 10, 100 to 110. That's exciting. You can use hexadecimal. Did you know you could use hexadecimal? You can use hexadecimal. One cool thing about this, rather than a for loop, which I'll get to here in a sec, is it's really simple syntax for doing a lot of things at once. So say you wanted to create 100 new virtual machines. I don't have that logic defined here, just for simplicity. Say I wanted to create 100 computers. 1 to 100. For each one of those, computer that. And I just have 100 defined computers that I can then use and create new VMs, create whatever. To create files, to create an IP list here. I can create all the IPs in a subnet that I wanted. So here I have broken into groups of 4, 0 through 10, and then 200 to 250. It's exciting. Wow, how many? Maths. So how many cool things can I do with all the time we have left? So.
Well, we haven't really done jumped into while, but while is also there are very few easy to describe use cases. Just, for those of you who want a real example, it's a little hard to do it without getting too deep in the weeds. Do you want to jump into while, or should we take another question? It's up to you guys.
We can take another question, but I also want to show for really quick as well.
Okay, let's go to while.
This guy, for. So
we're going to go to for. Okay.
This just because it's really easy. For initialization, condition, and increment. You define where you start, what you're actually evaluating, and what to increment. So in this case, from 0, I'm going to start at 0 and increment every 1 time. That's what the ++ means. It says use it and then increment at 1.
But stop at 10.
Stop when it equals 10. So up through less than 10. So in this case, I will create a new in some path files. I don't have anything? No. And create them. In fact, let's take off the WhatIf and just do it. Let's do it. It'll be fun.
Cool.
I just created 10 files. Magic. I can create 1,000, 10,000. The world's my oyster. So
the ForEach really comes down to when, like, if you're looking for all the files in a directory and you don't know how many files are going to be in there, ForEach is great because you're saying, give me all the files, and then for each file that you found, and that could be 3, and that could be 3,000. Whereas in this case, a for, you're specifying, I want the first 10, 0 through 9. Yeah. I want the first 10, whatever you're finding, files, values, objects, whatever. You're specifying the start and the end with the for versus the ForEach, which is, I like ForEach personally because it was a huge improvement because so many of the for statements that I've had to do were based off of what's values in a registry or files in a directory.
Sure.
But there are very, very good cases where you just need to use for.
Yeah. Well, I guess we don't really get into while. I know we're kind of short in time here, but if we had time for one more question, I'm happy to see if we can go to that. I don't know if we do or not. I'm throwing myself under the bus.
Yeah, we're getting back into the if statements, the conditions.
Oh, cool. Well, good. Yeah, I love if statements.
Dear Chris and Shane, can you have too many ifs in a script? Should you limit it to a certain amount? Sincerely, Mary M.
Hi, Mary.
I mean, that's somewhat of a subjective question. There's not going to be a hard limit to the number of ifs, but it's going to be, it can make it difficult to read, especially if you're passing this on. Chris definitely has something he wants to say. I'm going to give you a really quick, the gospel according to Shane.
Yay.
You want to make it somewhat easy to read, especially if you're handing these scripts off to somebody else. Those of you who are consultants that need to do your work and then pass it off, the documentation. If it's difficult to read, then you're doing a disservice. But there's not going to be a hard limit of ifs that I know of. Okay, go ahead.
That just summarizes more or less what I'm going to say, which is, first off, keep your code clean. If you can keep it pretty easy to read, document it, that's fantastic. And if it works, run with it, roll with it, do it. You'll learn. I do recommend doing switch statements when you can. There might be a negligible performance difference between that and if statement. I'm not positive, but it's so easy to read. If you have a lot of nested if statements, go for it. Go to town. If this, oh, well, then if that, oh, well, then if that. Oh, yeah, go for it. If it works, you're learning a lot, hopefully, while you're doing it. And then later, you'll come back a year or so and look at this and think, oh, my goodness, why did I do it this way? That's just so silly. But then you'll actually have that foundation to build off of, is kind of the way I take it. So.
All right. And I'm going to ask a question of Kelly. As we wrap this up, I would like to know some suggestions from people. I know they've given us some in the past on future subjects. Would they like us to go into cross-platform into the Linux stuff? Would they like us to go? We've got Jordan here. Jordan would love to discuss at some point, I'm sure, PowerShell in relation to Exchange. Do we have Exchange administrators out there that would like something in that? So please let us know. Kelford, maybe throw that out there and tell them where they can go to give their suggestions.
Good call.
Hey, thank you very much, Chris.
Yes.
Rock on, everybody. Thank you for watching. We will we'll check you out the next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for joining our webcast today. I want to congratulate Michael Z., winner of our fabulous PowerShell t-shirt. Send us your info at webcast@pdq.com. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you back here next time.